Hey everyone, it's E. Welcome back to my channel. This week's video might be kind of a doozy. It is the next video in our Disney Channel original movie review series, and it's going to be the video which covers every single Halloween related movie. I could have split this up into two parts, but I didn't want to, so let's just jump into it. The first movie we're going to be talking about is, of course, Halloweentown. You may be able to tell already, maybe not, that this week's fan art is for Halloweentown. Halloweentown is a 4-movie series, and the first one is just called Halloweentown. And I love this movie. It is very Halloween-y. It has just the right amount of spookiness. It's not like a scary movie, but there are some tense moments. The computer effects in this movie were used pretty sparingly, which is good because they weren't great, but they were okay for this movie. And the costuming was awesome. So they did a lot of practical effects, animatronic type stuff like Benny the cab driver, and it just looked really cool. It had kind of like a Party City look to it, which I know sounds like it would look cheap, but it just looked very, like, it's nostalgic to look at now. And I think that's really cool. The witchy clothes are really awesome. Marnie's grandmother, everything she wears is iconic. Marnie's little witch costume, which I guess is authentic because her witch grandma gave it to her, is really cute. And I really, love the costuming, and just the aesthetic of this movie is perfectly Halloween-y. So the plot of this movie is pretty simple and straightforward. So Marnie sneaks away to Halloweentown because she wants to learn to be a witch, and her mom won't let her, and her little siblings tag along with her. And when they get there, it turns out that there's this evil guy named Kalabar who is turning Halloweentown monsters into like real scary people. And his plan, I think, is to take over the mortal world because he wants to rule it. And so basically, Marnie and her siblings have to save her mom and her grandma, who were affected by Kalabar, and obviously foil his plot. And there are a lot of really memorable scenes. Like at one point they're needing to make witch's brew, so they need to get ingredients, and there's a scene where they're collecting ghost sweat, and that is just one of those scenes that's ingrained in my memory forever. It's very iconic and memorable. There are only 2 issues that I really have with this movie. One is the first scene in this movie theater. Marnie remarks that the villain, Kalabar, can't stand the light because they open the door and he shrinks away from the light. But later on in the movie, at the climax, he's standing outside in broad daylight. I think that he puts a cloud over himself, but if the light that came in through the door in the movie theater was too much for him, wouldn't just the sun outside of the little cloud that he makes be too much for him? So that was kind of inconsistent. And 2, Marnie has this hunch at the end of the movie about where to put this talisman, and the place you're supposed to put it is inside the jack-o'-lantern, like the one in the drawing that I'm making. And it's kind of like she just her first hunch is actually correct, and I hate that in young adult, teen, kid movies and books and stuff whenever their first guess is correct, because it's usually kind of random. Anyway, the story gets a 4 out of 5, the acting gets a 3 out of 5, the enjoyability gets a 5 out of 5, and I wasn't entirely sure what the lesson of this movie was. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I think the lesson may be choosing your own path, but the lesson was not that driven home, but it's a really cute movie. Moving on, though, is Halloweentown 2, Kalabar's Revenge. The plot in this one is a little bit less straightforward and a little convoluted. So basically, Kalabar's son comes, and he's basically trying to do the same thing his dad was, which is take over the mortal world. And he steals a spell book, and Marnie has to get it back, and she has to learn how to reverse this gray spell that he put on Halloweentown, which is making everyone turn gray and not so Halloween-y. So this movie is not as Halloween-y as the first one because there's a curse being employed to make it so. But anyway, the concept is that they have to say the spell backwards in order to reverse it, and that's silly enough. But the fact that the particular spell that they have to do is in English, which is basically the only spell in the whole movie series that is in English, and is basically just one word, it's kind of incongruous with everything else in the universe of this movie. Also, they have to say it like a spell for it to work, but Marnie accidentally reverses the gray spell on her friend Luke at the beginning of the movie, and she just says it in part of a sentence. She doesn't say it like a spell, and it works to reverse the spell on him, so that doesn't make sense. And also, a lot of this movie relies on time travel, which I hate. I think that time travel is a lazy writing technique. Like, it's a lazy plot device. Like, oh, we need to get them out of the situation. What do we do? Time travel. I hate it. What the villain is attempting to do is at least kind of good, and the costumes for the Halloweentown people are still pretty cool in this movie. The story, I give a 2 out of 5. The acting gets a 4 out of 5. The lesson gets a 3 out of 5, which is make your own rules. And the enjoyability gets a 3 out of 5. Next up is Halloweentown High. This movie is the last one that actually still has, I think her name is Kimberly J. Brown, is the girl who plays Marnie. It's the last movie in the Halloweentown series that has her playing Marnie. So I guess I would say it's probably the last of the true Halloweentown movies. And this one's a little bit disappointing because it takes place almost entirely in the mortal world, and all of the monsters who come to the mortal world to go to school are all in like human disguises, so we don't get to see any cool looking Halloween creatures for most of the movie. None of the movie really takes place in Halloweentown. So it's called Halloweentown High. You would think it'd be about Marnie going to school in Halloweentown, but really it's the other way around, so the title is even misleading. At the beginning of the movie, Marnie is said to still be a level 1 witch, but at the end of Halloweentown 2, Kalabar's Revenge, her grandma Aggie talks about how Marnie is one of the most powerful witches ever, and so it's kind of like this movie attempts to retcon the ending of the last movie, and this movie is also kind of random, and I think a total departure from the other two. The last movie made it seem like Kalabar's son would be waiting to come back because they didn't actually like kill him or anything. And this movie just had nothing to do with Kalabar at all. This one was not very charming. Like I said, we don't get to see a lot of the cool creatures and monsters. And honestly, I kind of zoned in and out of this one. So basically, the whole point of the movie was about integration and Marnie wanting to prove to the people of Halloweentown that humans could be accepting of monsters. And that kind of, I guess, happened by the end of the movie. But I think that, while there was nothing really wrong with the movie per se, it was kind of unexciting. And also, like, her little sister, like, showed up at the very beginning of this movie for, like, 5 seconds, and it's like, where is she in all of this? Like, her brother Dylan is in this movie pretty heavily, like, he's all throughout the movie, but her little sister barely even shows up. Anyway, the story gets a 3 out of 5, the acting gets a 4 out of 5, the lesson actually gets a 5 out of 5 in this movie. It was really good. It's people can't accept you for who you are if you never show them the real you. And the enjoyability, I gave a 1 out of 5 because, like I said, I was zoning in and out. I can't, in good conscience, give it much more than that since I was not really able to pay very close attention, though I tried. And the final movie in the Halloweentown series is called Return to Halloweentown, and this is Marnie going to college, basically, in Halloweentown. And again, like I said, Kimberly J. Brown is no longer playing Marnie. She's being portrayed by Sarah Paxton. I mean, they look similar-ish, but I wish that they would have at least gave Sarah Paxton some brown contact lenses. Like, that would have been kind of like the bare minimum, in my opinion, of making her look more like Marnie. But, like, basically, I guess we just have to accept that Marnie's face has changed and her eye color has changed and whatever. We're just supposed to not care, I guess. This movie also kind of confuses some of the chronology of the previous Halloweentown movies, which it's not a big deal, but if you like lore, I feel like her grandmother Agatha kind of implies that the establishment of Halloweentown is something that occurred at least after, like, the time of the Enlightenment, because she spends a lot of those earlier movies talking about how she personally knew Shakespeare, she personally knew Da Vinci, and she, like, personally knew all these people, and I don't know. Maybe we're supposed to believe that she was traveling back and forth between the worlds, but I kind of got the impression that the worlds hadn't been separated yet at that point, but I don't know. I just feel like this movie muddies it up by attempting to add too much lore into it. It's about these villains at this witch university who want to harness some ancestral power of the Cromwell family, which is Marnie's family on her mom's side. And they want Marnie's help to subjugate all of the non-magical monsters in Halloweentown. So it's like witch supremacy. This movie, though it takes place in Halloweentown, lacks the good monsters that we saw in the first and second movies. So most of the kids who go to school at the witch college are witches, and so they just look like humans. And then the kids who are monsters aren't as monstrous as they have been in previous movies. There's only a couple of kids who really look like the kind of cheesy, cute, nostalgic Halloweentown monsters. And it's also worth noting that there was an attempt at a love story in this movie between Marnie and the guy that's played by Lucas Grabeel, whose name I can't remember at this point. Maybe it's like Seth or something, I don't know. And the love story was just alright. I just think that the movie overall lacked charm, was too convoluted, and again, utilized time travel, which, like I said, I think is lazy. So, I don't know. The story, I give a 2 out of 5. The acting gets a 3 out of 5. I don't think that Sarah Paxton is as good as of a Marnie as Kimberly J. Brown was. The lesson gets a 3 out of 5. It's about power, responsibility, humility, etc. And the enjoyability, I give a 1 out of 5. I also really didn't care that much about this movie, but that's all of the Halloweentown movies. Watch the first 2, maybe the third one, definitely not the fourth. Okay, the next Halloween DCOM I'll talk about is Underwraps, which is technically the first ever Disney Channel original movie. I really liked this one, actually. There are a couple of laugh out loud moments in this movie. To me, it's a really great example of a true family movie. As a Halloween movie, it's decently spooky, too. There are so many memorable moments as they befriend and decide to help Harold the mummy find his sarcophagus and be reunited with his true love in the afterlife. The ending is fairly exciting, and we learn that the protagonist, Marshall, is able to come around to his mom remarrying because of seeing the mummy Harold's devotion to his Egyptian queen. It's a really interesting and unique take on a Halloween love story, and I just found this movie to be really cute. I think that the costuming was really good. I think, like I said, it was pretty spooky. The kid actors were really, like, charming and cute. I liked that there was this female protagonist who's kind of, I don't know, tomboyish, and so she's really funny. And I love the whole premise of this movie. It's very enchanting. So, I know I didn't say much about it, but I would definitely recommend watching it. The story is a 4 out of 5. Acting gets a 4 out of 5. The lesson gets a 3 out of 5. Like I said, it's about learning about love, and the enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. Next up, let's talk about the Scream team. These are both kind of like classic DCOMs, very nostalgic seeming. I think the Scream team is a cute movie with a unique story. But honestly, I started dozing a little bit while watching it because, as usual, it seemed a little too long. But at the same time, it didn't drag too much. It's sort of like a mystery story, which is cool. But like the dad in this movie, who plays a pretty big role, isn't exactly the most charismatic. The costuming for the ghosts in this movie is cool and suggests fun, different ways that they may have died. There's like this soul retrieval system for the afterlife, which is a really cool concept, and I like the way it was visualized. But for whatever reason, it doesn't quite have the full spook factor for me. This movie is about these kids who are trying to help their grandpa into the afterlife, and meanwhile having to solve the mystery of what exactly happened to this one ghost who is basically preventing that from happening. The story gets a 4 out of 5, the acting gets a 3 out of 5, the lesson gets a 2 out of 5, and the lesson is spending time with your kids, not living in the moment with them and worrying about the future detracting from your relationship. I just don't feel like they drove it home enough, and it was mostly just they basically said that verbatim at the end was the lesson of the story, and the enjoyability just gets a 2 out of 5. Next up is Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire. This has Mr. Sheffield from The Nanny in it, and that's quite nice. I really appreciate all the references to the old Dracula movie, like the restaurant being named Renfield's, and Dimitri, who is the vampire date, saying, "I don't drink wine." It's actually a really cute movie with a good story. I like the flow of the movie and like the somewhat slow reveal that the mom's date really is a vampire. We know it basically for the whole movie, but it takes a while for Adam and his sister Chelsea, and even longer for their mom to realize it. It's got really great acting, sets, and a pretty spooky feel. And I like that instead of a case of like mistaken identity, he actually really is a vampire. It's really cute, and I think it's exciting and fun. The story gets a 5 out of 5. The acting gets a 4 out of 5. The lesson is 3 out of 5. The lesson is the love of family is powerful. That's basically how they're able to break the trance that he has on their mom at the end. And the enjoyability gets a 5 out of 5. Next up is Don't Look Under the Bed. This one's kind of odd. So there's a bunch of pranks being pulled around town, and everybody thinks that the protagonist, Frances, is doing it because of some circumstantial evidence. And there's this imaginary friend who's trying to help her. His name is Larry. And she has like a full-on conversation with him at one point in the middle of the school cafeteria, and no one really seems to notice. This movie kind of drags on. There's this scene that takes place in a library that just goes on forever. Basically, there's this whole part of the movie where Larry, who's the imaginary friend, is trying to convince Frances that he is, in fact, imaginary. And it's such a long and boring part of the movie. It's the bulk of the movie, and it's like, I just don't care. Like, I don't care why it even matters that she believes that he's an imaginary friend. And especially considering the beginning of this movie is actually fairly entertaining, like watching all of these fun pranks happen and, you know, Frances trying to convince people on her own that it's not her. The actual plot of the movie starts with the creation of something called Boogie Goo, which is to bait the boogeyman, who is the one who is starting all of the pranks. The movie is just eternal, though, because, like, this Boogie Goo doesn't happen until basically the very end. It's like it took until then for the actual movie to start, is what it feels like. And there's the end of the movie where they go into the Boogie World, which is basically like this portal under her bed. And it's really not great because there's all of these giant items under the bed. So, like, they're shrunk down, basically, to go into the Boogie World under the bed. And, like, so all of the stuff that you lose under the bed is in there. But, like, a D battery looks like it's about 10 feet tall. But there's a toy car that's big enough for them to sit on. And it's like, for the scale to be correct for all of those items in real life, the toy car would have to be half the size of the D battery, which is just not the size of a toy car. So I don't know. The Boogie World was not well executed. So basically they find out that the boogeyman is Frances's abandoned imaginary friend, and she makes nice with her, and she's no longer the boogeyman, and Larry and her imaginary friend go off to the next town over to prevent further calamity from reaching that town as the result of another kid's imaginary friend turned boogeyman. It's an odd movie, and the pacing is terrible. The story, I give a 2 out of 5. The acting gets a 3 out of 5. The lesson, which is about growing up, I give a 3 out of 5. And the enjoyability, I give a 1 out of 5. Alright, next up is Phantom of the Megaplex. Really, this movie I should not have included on the Halloween list. Like, it was listed online as a Halloween Disney Channel original movie, but it's really not that Halloween-y. It's, I guess, sort of a play on Phantom of the Opera. And this is one of my husband's favorite DCOMs from when he was a kid, or at least it's one that he remembers, so he actually agreed to watch this one with me. It's a cute, simple mystery movie. It's about this big midnight movie premiere at a fancy movie theater and all of the mishaps that occur along the way, which are carried out by this mysterious Phantom of the Megaplex. The movie opens with a bunch of unnecessary explanation of who everybody who works at the movie theater is, and that's a little bit tedious, but once that's over, the movie gets going and it's pretty fun. There's this subplot, though, with their mom getting engaged, and it's really just not needed. It's totally unnecessary and does not contribute anything to the overall movie. As a movie about sibling bonding, it was really quite cute. So the oldest son works at the Megaplex, and his younger siblings are the ones who are there trying to help him figure out who's causing all of the mayhem at the movie theater. I think that the reveal of who the Phantom was may have been a little bit too predictable, but at least it wasn't totally out of nowhere. I love the setting, as basically the entire movie takes place in the movie theater. And I feel like this was just like a high quality Disney Channel original movie. Like, it felt like something that maybe could have gone to theaters. The story, I give a 4 out of 5. The acting gets a 3 out of 5. The lesson gets a 5 out of 5. The lesson being about work-life balance, especially with family time, which is an important lesson. And enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. Okay, next let's get past the Twitches movies. So I think it's really cool for Twitches that they actually made a DCOM about adult women. So these are 21-year-old girls. I think it's funny that Tia and Tamara are once again playing twins who've been separated at birth, because basically that was the premise of their show Sister Sister. I just don't know what happened with the characterization in this movie. So Alex was initially the hesitant one, and then suddenly she's all gung-ho for helping Coventry, which is the dimension from which they come. It was stupid and pointless. Nothing happens in this movie for a long time, and I can't figure out what the purpose of these two guardian characters are. They're called Karsh and Ileana. Like, they really do nothing in the whole movie. They're just there watching. Are they supposed to be, like, narrators, but they're not narrators? So, nothing happens in the whole movie, so there's really nothing for me to tell you about the plot, except for at the very end where the two girls finally both get on the same page about going to Coventry, which is the other dimension where they're from, and they both finally go there for the last time, because they've been there several times throughout the movie. And even still, the ending of the movie is still more exposition than anything. The whole movie is just them finding out about their past and about Coventry. But even after all of the exposition, I still don't understand what this darkness is, or how it works. So basically their whole movie is about them trying to defeat this darkness, which is threatening Coventry, but also somehow seems to be threatening their world. Like I said, I have no idea what's going on in this movie. Nothing happens. I don't get it. The story I give a 1 out of 5. The acting I give a 3 out of 5. The lesson I give a 3 out of 5. The lesson is that love is infinite, and the enjoyability gets a 1 out of 5. So let's go ahead and talk about Twitches 2. So for some reason they decided to make a sequel. Nothing happened in the first one, and guess what? Still, nothing much happens in the second one. This movie is slightly better than the first one, but still most of the movie is the two girls, Alex and Cameron, just talking and arguing, and there's not really any plot or action. Basically, they just keep having the same conversation over and over and over again. At least the ending to this one is sort of exciting, but it's way too long. And basically the point is that they think that the villain from the first movie is hiding in the shadow realm, and their mom is trying to get them to do this thing called the vanquishing spell that will kill anybody who's hiding in the shadows. And Alex doesn't want to do it because she thinks her dad is also hiding in the shadow realm, and she doesn't want to kill him. And so at the end they say the spell, and Cameron does the vanquishing spell because she doesn't, I guess, trust Alex that her dad is in the shadow realm. And the way that they made it seem like this vanquishing spell would happen, like, and that it was so time sensitive that they do it at just precise moment. But it just drags on and on and on and on forever. And you think, again, this is going to be an instantaneous thing where they do the vanquishing spell and it's too late, their dad's dead. But basically this spell takes forever to ferment. And so they have basically the whole end of the movie is this forever long sequence of them trying to force the evil guy back into the shadow realm so he can be vanquished and pull their dad out of the shadows. Anyway, I don't know. The pace and the timing and all that at the end of the movie is just totally off. The story I give a 2 out of 5. The acting gets a 3 out of 5. The lesson gets a 1 out of 5. I don't know what it was. It was about family love, I guess. And the enjoyability gets a 2 out of 5. So those are the Twitches movies. Okay, next we have Girl vs. Monster. So this is about this girl whose parents are monster hunters. And yeah, so basically on Halloween night, her parents get captured by a monster, I think, and she and her friends try to capture all of the monsters that escaped again. So anyway, the monsters in this movie seem more like ghosts, so it's very reminiscent of like Danny Phantom, but it's not quite as cool. So there's this theme throughout the movie of fear controlling people, and that theme was super consistent, which I appreciate, but it was a little too over the top. It was too much. Like, they just kept beating it over and over again, like over our heads. It's like, we get it, fear, blah blah, we're done. It's a cute story with a fairly cute lesson, but some of the movie doesn't make sense. The big bad monster is attached to Skylar, who is the main character, but her parents captured this monster when Skylar was a baby. So apparently Skylar grew up without fear because the monster that was attached to her, which she would be afraid of, was banished to this canister that her parents kept in the basement, and the canister breaks, and that's how she gets out at the beginning of the movie. However, the monster says that fear makes the monster, not the other way around. So which is it? If fear makes the monster, then Skylar should have created a new monster with her fears. It just didn't make sense. That wasn't really consistent world building. This movie is not a musical, but there are enough original songs in it to give a song rating. So let's move into the ratings. The story gets a 3 out of 5, the acting gets a 4 out of 5, the lesson about fear gets a 3 out of 5, the songs get a 3 out of 5, and the enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5. Okay, next we'll talk about Invisible Sister. This has Rowan Blanchard, who you may know from Girl Meets World, in it, and some other girl who I don't know. They play sisters named Cleo and Molly. The effects in this movie were decent. So basically, I think Molly is the older, more popular sister, and she's the one who turns invisible because of a science project that Cleo was doing. So the movie, asks us to suspend disbelief a little bit too much. So basically, like I said, the older, more popular sister turns invisible, and so the younger sister is basically, because it's Halloween, she's wearing a mask and pretending to be her sister. But the bottom of her face is exposed, and I do not think that Cleo and Molly look enough alike for us to really believe that Molly's best friends wouldn't recognize that that's not Molly, that's definitely her little sister, even with her partially obscured face. And couple that with the fake science, and the whole movie is just a big mess. So basically, Cleo makes this invisibility potion by total accident, and she turns a moth invisible, and then her sister eats the moth, which turns her sister invisible. I'm sorry, what? That's not how any of that works. That said, some of the scenes were pretty cute and funny. Like, there's this lacrosse game that's pretty funny. And so that's about all I have to say about this movie. New Orleans was kind of a waste of a cool setting, but at least the Halloween costumes were fun. The story gets a 2 out of 5, the lesson gets a 2 out of 5, and the lesson is don't be afraid to break out of your shell, which is kind of classic. The acting gets a 4 out of 5, and the enjoyability gets a 3 out of 5. And that takes us to our final Disney Channel original Halloween movie, and it is Can of Worms, which I didn't originally realize was a Halloween movie when I sat down to watch it, so that was kind of a fun surprise. So basically, there's a lot of nasty puppetry in this movie, but the puppets look pretty good. They have these really super realistic teeth, which are totally creepy. So basically, these puppets are aliens, which the main character Mike summons to take him away into outer space because he doesn't want to live on Earth anymore because he had this embarrassing experience at the Halloween dance. The character Mike kind of looks like and acts like some sort of pervert or serial killer with his social awkwardness, which is funny. For 1998, the effects are pretty decent. There's this villain called the Thode, who is one of the aliens that he summons, and the Thode is planning to abduct him to put him basically like a zoo. His villain clothes look a little bit too much like conventional human clothes, so that takes me out of the immersion a little bit. But it's pretty suspenseful and intense, which I like. I thought it would be explained how Mike knew about this race of aliens called the Hansel in his stories, because he loved to tell his neighbor friends stories about aliens and stuff. And I guess it turned out he had some sort of prescience and knew about the Hansel because they turned out to be a real race of aliens, but that was just never explained, so that was weird. And also, he at one point was able to use the key in the Thode's prison, which is an alien device, and we never get answers to how he's able to do that. It seems like the movie is implying that he is an alien, but it just never really reveals that at the end. So I just don't know what was going on with that. The movie otherwise is pretty cute with a good message for misfit kids, which is you do belong here, you're just as human as anyone else. And I thought maybe, is this an allegory for autism? If it is, it's a pretty effective allegory, and I appreciate that. So I give the story a 3 out of 5, the acting gets a 3 out of 5, The lesson gets a 5 out of 5, and the enjoyability gets a 4 out of 5, and that wraps it up for this video. I hope it wasn't too long. I covered 14 movies in this video when I've been covering more like 7 or 8. So if you made it all the way to the end, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope you liked the fan art for this week's video. I think it turned out really cute, and I hope you like it too. Peace out. Bye-bye.